In the summer of 2013, a renovation crew entered an abandoned electronics shop on the outskirts of a small southern town. Dust clung to every corner, shelves sagged with forgotten tools, and silence pressed heavy in the stale air. While clearing out a back room, one worker pried loose a warped panel and discovered a cardboard box tucked deep in the wall. Inside were dozens of cassette tapes, their labels written in small, careful handwriting. Most bore harmless titles: cartoons, radio shows, children's programs from a vanished era. But 3 tapes at the bottom froze everyone in place. Each carried a girl's name and a single date: July 15th, 1979. That was the day 3 little girls had vanished from their neighborhood yard without a trace. For 34 years their families had waited, haunted by questions that never found answers. Now, after decades of silence, the discovery of these tapes threatened to reopen the darkest chapter the town had ever known. What was on them? Who had hidden them here? And most terrifying of all, did they hold the voices of Emma, Lucy, and Mia in their final moments? Tonight, we return to that summer afternoon in 1979, when innocence slipped away under the bright sun, and a mystery was born that would torment generations. Stay with us, for by the end of this story, you will hear the echoes that lay buried for 3 decades. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to Untold Secrets Daily, and share your thoughts in the comments. The summer of 1979 in Millhaven, Tennessee, carried the kind of warmth that softened even the hardest edges of daily life. The air was thick with honeysuckle, the streets echoed with the rhythmic hum of cicadas, and children ran barefoot across lawns until twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and violet. It was a town where neighbors waved from porches, where mothers trusted their children to play outside until the first flicker of street lamps, and where the idea of true danger seemed like something that only belonged in distant cities. For families in Millhaven, safety was not questioned, it was assumed. On Maple Drive, a quiet residential street lined with single-story ranch homes and tidy gardens, the Peterson family had just settled into their new life. Their daughter, 8-year-old Emma, was bright-eyed and endlessly curious. She spent her afternoons exploring every inch of the yard, inventing games beneath the towering oak tree that had stood for generations. Her laughter carried easily across the fences, often joined by her best friend Lucy Brennan, another 8-year-old with a mischievous smile and boundless energy. That summer, their small circle had grown to include 7-year-old Mia Rodriguez, who had recently moved to town. Shy at first, Mia quickly became part of the trio, her gentle nature balancing Lucy's exuberance and Emma's adventurous spirit. Parents watched with fondness as the girls darted from one backyard to another, playing hide-and-seek, creating elaborate stories, and weaving the kind of friendships that feel unbreakable in childhood. To the families of Maple Drive, the sight of these 3 girls together was a picture of innocence, a reminder of how simple and safe life could feel in those long summer days. None could have imagined that within weeks, this same street would be scarred forever, its laughter replaced by whispers of fear, and its easy trust shattered beyond repair. July 15th, 1979, began like any other golden Saturday in Millhaven. The morning sun had already painted the streets in shimmering heat, and by mid-afternoon, the 3 inseparable friends had retreated to the Peterson family's backyard. Emma, Lucy, and Mia were inventing yet another adventure beneath the wide branches of the ancient oak tree, their voices rising and falling in playful bursts as they acted out their own version of secret agents on a daring mission. Janet Peterson, busy in the kitchen, glanced out through the screen window now and then, reassured by the sight of their small figures darting through the grass. To her, nothing seemed out of place. The gate at the back fence stood closed, the neighborhood was calm, and the gentle chatter of cicadas carried on the warm breeze. Around 3:30 p.m., Janet called out, urging them to come in for lemonade. Silence answered. She frowned, wiping her hands, and stepped onto the porch, expecting giggles or footsteps rushing toward her voice. Instead, the yard was strangely still. No movement behind the tree. No laughter hiding in the tall grass. A chill settled in her stomach. She walked the yard carefully, calling each name louder with every step. Emma, Lucy, Mia. Nothing but the low hum of an air conditioner from next door. Her heart pounding, Janet noticed the back gate hanging slightly ajar. She could not remember leaving it unlatched. The sight struck her like a blow. Racing around to the front, she scanned the sidewalk, praying the girls had simply wandered toward a neighbor's yard. Across the street, Mrs. Chun paused in her gardening as she saw Janet's expression. "Have you seen them?" Janet's voice trembled. Mrs. Chun shook her head, concern flashing in her eyes. Within minutes, phones rang. Lucy's parents rushed over, followed closely by the Rodriguezes. By 4 o'clock, the quiet street had transformed into chaos. Dozens of neighbors combed through every backyard, shed, and garage within blocks. They shouted the girls' names into alleys and fields, their calls echoing back unanswered. Fear spread quickly, wrapping itself around every parent who lived on Maple Drive. For the first time, Millhaven felt fragile. That afternoon marked the end of its innocence. 3 children had vanished in daylight, leaving behind only a half-empty pitcher of lemonade and questions that would torment the town for decades. By late afternoon, the once quiet street of Maple Drive had transformed into a scene of frantic confusion. Parents hurried from their homes, voices rising in desperation as they called the names of Emma, Lucy, and Mia into the heavy summer air. Yards that had moments earlier felt safe now seemed like mazes hiding unthinkable possibilities. Garage doors banged open, storage sheds were checked, and bushes were shaken aside by trembling hands. Within an hour, nearly every family in the neighborhood was involved in the search, the sound of dozens of voices overlapping in one urgent chorus. Detective Ray Sullivan of the Millhaven Police Department arrived just after 5 o'clock. A veteran officer with 20 years of service, he recognized the dread in the parents' eyes the moment he stepped inside the Petersons' living room. Janet, pale and shaken, described how the girls had been playing 1 minute and gone the next. Sullivan listened carefully, his notepad steady even as his own unease grew. 3 children disappearing together, in daylight, from a fenced yard. Such cases were rare, and they almost never ended simply. Neighbors provided fragments of possible clues. Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the alley, mentioned hearing children's laughter moving farther away around 3:45 p.m. A jogger claimed he had seen a dark-colored van idling at the end of the street near that same time, but he couldn't recall a license plate or details about the driver. These threads were thin, but they hinted at a larger, more chilling picture. As dusk approached, the search grew more organized. Volunteers formed lines, sweeping nearby fields and wooded areas. Police dogs were brought in, their noses lowering to the ground near the open back gate. For 50 yards they followed the girl's faint scent, until suddenly the trail ended as if the children had vanished into thin air. Murmurs of disbelief spread through the gathered crowd. How could 3 little girls simply disappear? That night, Maple Drive no longer felt like the safe haven it had once been. Doors were locked, porch lights flickered on early, and parents held their children closer. The community's innocence had cracked, replaced by an unease that no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. As the sun sank and night settled over Millhaven, the urgency of the search gave way to the steady rhythm of an official investigation. Floodlights illuminated the Peterson backyard, casting long, nervous shadows across the oak tree that had been the girls' fortress of play only hours earlier. Uniformed officers cordoned off the property, marking every inch for photographs and notes. Parents huddled together, clinging to each word from Detective Ray Sullivan, who promised that every possible lead would be pursued. The first hours were critical. Sullivan ordered door-to-door canvassing. Neighbors questioned about anything unusual they might have seen. Several recalled hearing laughter earlier in the day, but could not pinpoint the moment it stopped. Mrs. Patterson's account of voices drifting away gained new weight, especially when paired with the jogger's fleeting memory of the van at the street's end. The description was vague, dark, possibly blue or black, older model. But it was the only tangible clue they had. By midnight, the FBI had been contacted. Agents from Nashville arrived the next morning, their presence signaling the seriousness of the case. Together with local officers, they set up a command post at the community center. Maps were unrolled, timelines drawn, and teams assigned specific search zones. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights sweeping the dark fields and woods beyond Maple Drive. The girl's scent, detected by the K-9 unit near the open gate, remained the most unsettling piece of evidence. The trail's sudden end after 50 yards suggested one chilling possibility. They had been taken into a vehicle. Investigators began cross-checking reports of suspicious vans in the area, though the lack of license plate information left them chasing shadows. At a press briefing, Sullivan urged calm, but could not hide his concern. "We are treating this as a priority case. No detail is too small. If anyone saw something, anything, we need you to come forward." His words echoed across television screens, the story already capturing the attention of local media. The smiling school photos of Emma, Lucy, and Mia appeared in newspapers the following day, turning their disappearance from a neighborhood tragedy into a regional alarm. Still, for all the activity, no concrete lead emerged. Witnesses contradicted one another, and the van's sighting faded into uncertainty. The investigation had begun with determination, but beneath the structure of charts and checklists lingered an unspoken fear. The trail was already growing cold. Within days, the disappearance of Emma, Lucy, and Mia leapt from local headlines to national news. Reporters flooded into Millhaven, their vans lined along Maple Drive, satellite dishes rising like mechanical trees above the rooftops. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and every knock at the Petersons' door carried the hope of answers that never came. What began as a desperate community search was now a story consumed by millions. For the families, the attention was a double-edged sword. Janet Peterson, though exhausted and trembling with fear, found herself speaking for the others, appearing on talk shows and pleading into cameras for her daughter's safe return. Her voice, cracked but determined, became the symbol of the town's grief. Lucy's parents, more private by nature, recoiled from the relentless spotlight, but understood that silence could mean fading from public memory. The Rodriguezes, still adjusting to life in Millhaven, struggled with both language barriers and the unrelenting pressure of strangers dissecting their every word. The community, once defined by open doors and easy trust, began to change. Parents who had once let children roam freely now kept them indoors. Locks were checked twice, curfews were set earlier, and suspicion replaced the warmth that had long bound neighbors together. The oak tree in the Petersons' backyard, once a monument to carefree afternoons, became a grim reminder of innocence lost. Millhaven's reputation suffered too. Property values dipped, families moved away, and the once vibrant summer block parties faded into memory. For those who stayed, each day carried the weight of unanswered questions. The girls' faces stared back from posters on telephone poles, their smiles slowly weathered by sun and rain. And with each passing week, hope flickered weaker, leaving behind a hollow space filled only with whispers of fear. Weeks turned into months, and the relentless search for Emma, Lucy, and Mia began to lose its momentum. Despite the tireless work of Detective Sullivan, the FBI agents, and countless volunteers, no new evidence surfaced. Every potential lead dissolved into disappointment. Each anonymous tip a false trail, every supposed sighting an illusion. The enthusiasm that had once fueled nightly searches dimmed as exhaustion and despair set in. By winter, the command center at the community hall was dismantled. Maps were rolled away, case boards cleared, and volunteers returned to their normal lives with heavy hearts. Officially, the case remained open, but the investigation slowed to a crawl. Officers were reassigned to newer cases, leaving Sullivan with only a thin file and gnawing frustration. He carried the burden of knowing that 3 young lives had vanished under his watch, and he could not provide the families with answers. For the parents, each day was an agonizing repetition of the last. Phone calls jolted them awake in the middle of the night, each ring sparking fragile hope before ending in crushing silence. They chased rumors across counties, hired private investigators, and begged for renewed media coverage, but nothing broke through the fog of uncertainty. The financial toll grew heavy, but the emotional cost was far greater. Some marriages strained under the weight, grief twisting into arguments that could not be mended. Millhaven itself bore scars that would not fade. The once lively street of Maple Drive felt quieter, its homes shadowed by the weight of what had happened. Parents no longer trusted the world outside their doors, and children grew up learning fear far earlier than they should have. Community gatherings dwindled, and where laughter once echoed, silence now lingered. By the summer of 1980, the girls' absence had settled into the grim category of a cold case. Their names still appeared on flyers, their photographs still smiled from the walls of police stations, but for many outside their families, they became part of a fading story. For those closest, however, time brought no relief. The wound remained open, raw, and unhealed. The unanswered question, what really happened that July afternoon, hung over Millhaven like a shadow that refused to lift. As the years slipped by, the disappearance of Emma, Lucy, and Mia transformed from an urgent tragedy into a haunting memory that never left Millhaven. Through the 1980s, anniversaries were marked with candlelight vigils and solemn gatherings at the Peterson home. Neighbors brought flowers, pastors offered prayers, and reporters returned briefly to ask the same painful questions. But as each year passed without answers, the crowds grew smaller. By the 1990s, the case lived mostly in faded newspaper clippings and the aching hearts of 3 families. Technology advanced, new methods of investigation emerged, yet the boxes of evidence remained untouched on dusty shelves. Detective Ray Sullivan, though promoted and later retired, kept copies of the files at home. He read them often, searching for patterns or missed details, refusing to let the case fade completely. One day, he would tell himself, something will surface. For the families, life became a balancing act between survival and remembrance. Emma's room remained frozen in time, her toys carefully dusted by Janet Peterson. Lucy's parents, weighed down by grief, eventually separated, unable to bridge the silence that loss had carved between them. The Rodriguezes, though quieter in public, clung fiercely to Mia's memory, their resilience a testament to love enduring through sorrow. The community, too, had changed. Children who once played beneath the oak tree grew up with an inherited fear, their childhoods colored by warnings and restrictions. Millhaven's reputation suffered, and newcomers learned the story in hushed whispers, their eyes drifting toward Maple Drive with unease. By the 2000s, decades had passed, and the case was cold to the world. But to those who had lived it, time had not healed. It had only deepened the silence. Beneath that silence, however, a truth waited. And in 2013, after 34 long years, the walls themselves would finally give up their secret. In the summer of 2013, Millhaven was no longer the same town it had been in 1979. New families had moved in, old ones had long departed, and Maple Drive carried the weight of its story like a scar. For most, the case of the 3 missing girls was a tragic chapter remembered only in whispers. But fate, after decades of silence, was about to stir. That July, an old electronics shop on the outskirts of town was undergoing renovation. Once owned by a reclusive repairman, the building had sat abandoned for nearly 2 decades, its windows boarded and its walls weathered by storms. Construction crews moved through the dust-choked rooms, tearing down old shelving and clearing debris. In the back, behind a warped wooden panel, one worker's crowbar struck hollow. Curious, he pulled the panel loose, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside sat a cardboard box covered in grime, its edges softened with age. At first glance, the contents seemed harmless. A stack of cassette tapes, their handwritten labels listing children's shows, radio broadcasts, and old commercials. But at the bottom of the box were 3 tapes that froze the crew in place. Each bore a girl's name carefully written in ink: Emma, Lucy, and Mia. Beneath the names was a date: July 15, 1979. The foreman immediately called the police, and soon the tapes were in the custody of Millhaven authorities. Detective Maria Santos, who had inherited the cold case files after Sullivan's retirement, stared at the labels in disbelief. For 34 years, no physical evidence had ever surfaced. Now, in her hands, was the first tangible link to the girl's final day. The discovery ignited a storm. News vans once again descended on Millhaven, headlines declaring the breakthrough that no one thought would come. For the families, the moment was both hope and dread. The tapes promised answers, but also threatened to reveal truths too painful to bear. What lay within them would shatter the silence of 3 decades and rewrite everything the town thought it knew about that July afternoon. The tapes were transferred to the Millhaven Police Department and handled with the utmost care. Detective Maria Santos, along with an FBI agent specializing in child abduction cases, prepared themselves to listen to what had been hidden for 34 years. A secure room was cleared, the blinds drawn, and an old cassette player was placed on the table. Officers stood silently, aware that whatever was about to play could finally break open the mystery, or scar everyone who heard it. The first tape bore the label Emma. When the play button clicked, the room filled with the faint hiss of static. Then came the sound of a door creaking shut, followed by muffled crying. A girl's voice, shaky but recognizable from old-school recordings, broke through. It was Emma Peterson. Her words were brave but trembling. "Please, we want to go home. Our parents are looking for us." A male voice responded, distorted and deep, though not loud. "You're going to be here for a while. You need to be good girls and do exactly what I say." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The girls then answered questions: names, ages, small details about their families. Their voices were small, scared, but obedient, clinging to the hope that cooperation would mean freedom. The next tape, labeled Lucy, carried the sounds of the following day. The girls spoke among themselves, trying to comfort one another. Emma urged them to stay strong. Lucy sobbed, calling out for her mother. Mia, the youngest, asked over and over when they would be allowed to go home. In the background, an electronic humming echoed, a sound later identified as consistent with equipment used in repair shops of that era. By the third tape, labeled Mia, the mood had shifted drastically. The voices were weaker, their conversations fragmented by long stretches of silence. Occasionally, a sob broke through, or a whispered prayer from Emma, desperate to keep her friends calm. Near the end, the man's voice returned, though garbled and difficult to decipher. His words were faint, his tone commanding. Then, suddenly, the tape cut off mid-sentence, leaving only the sound of the machine spinning to silence. For the families, hearing the recordings was devastating. Janet Peterson wept as she listened to her daughter's small, steady voice, filled with courage even in fear. "That was Emma," she whispered, "always trying to protect the others." The Brennans and Rodriguezes, too, were left shaken, confronted with the sound of their daughters alive days after the world had assumed them gone. The tapes confirmed what had long been feared. The girls had not simply vanished. They had been taken, held somewhere close, and recorded by a man who had hidden in plain sight. The evidence was chilling, but it was also undeniable. For the first time in decades, investigators had a voice to follow, a trail to pursue, and perhaps, finally, a chance to uncover the truth. Investigators quickly turned their attention to the man who had once owned the electronics shop where the tapes were found. His name was Harold Vance, a reclusive figure who had operated the small repair business from the mid-1970s until his sudden death in 1994. Vance had lived alone in a modest apartment above the shop, rarely seen outside except when tinkering with old radios or televisions. To most in Millhaven, he was little more than a quiet man who kept to himself. But as detectives dug deeper, unsettling details emerged. Records showed that before moving to Millhaven, Vance had worked at electronics stores in Memphis and Little Rock. Former colleagues described him as peculiar, with an unusual interest in children who visited with their parents. Complaints had been filed about inappropriate conversations, though no charges were ever brought. Each time suspicion grew, Vance moved on, slipping into another town, another job, leaving little behind but whispers. Neighbors recalled glimpses of his repair van parked in odd places around Maple Drive during the summer of 1979. At the time, it had seemed insignificant, just a man doing business. But in hindsight, those sightings became chilling. The tapes only confirmed what many now feared. Vance had watched, planned, and acted. With his death nearly 2 decades earlier, direct justice was impossible. Yet the discovery of the tapes tied him inexorably to the crime. His handwriting matched the labels, his shop's location fit the audio clues, and his solitary lifestyle aligned with the profile of a predator who had hidden in plain sight. Though Harold Vance could no longer face trial, the truth about him had finally surfaced. For the families, the revelation was a grim vindication. Their daughters had not wandered off. They had been taken by a man the community had overlooked, a shadow who had thrived in silence. The discovery of the tapes reignited the case with an urgency unseen in decades. A joint task force was formed, combining local police, the FBI, and forensic experts determined to squeeze every possible clue from the fragile cassettes and the shop where they had been hidden. For the first time since 1979, investigators felt the weight of tangible evidence in their hands. Audio engineers enhanced the recordings, peeling back static to isolate background sounds. Beneath the children's voices, they identified the faint whir of machines common to repair shops, confirming that the girls had likely been held on the premises. Traffic noise hinted at the building's proximity to Highway 96, a detail consistent with the shop's location. Linguists studied the man's distorted speech, concluding he carried a mild Southern accent and was likely middle-aged at the time. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the building itself. Behind crumbling drywall and beneath warped floorboards, they uncovered fragments of children's clothing and fibers preserved by decades of dust. DNA testing, unthinkable in 1979, revealed partial matches to the families of Emma, Lucy, and Mia. For investigators, this was the breakthrough that tied Harold Vance to the crime beyond doubt. The case files, once relegated to archives, now filled conference tables. Old witness statements were re-examined in light of the new evidence. Former residents were re-interviewed, and patterns of Vance's behavior in other towns were cross-checked against unsolved disappearances. Though Vance was long dead, the reopening of the case brought a measure of justice. Science had done what time had obscured, connecting the fragments of a tragedy into a coherent truth. For Millhaven, it was a reminder that even decades-old shadows could still be illuminated. For the families of Emma, Lucy, and Mia, the tapes were both a blessing and a curse. After 34 years of agonizing silence, they finally heard the voices of their daughters again. But those voices were trembling, frightened, and fading into despair. A cruel confirmation of the nightmare they had long feared. Janet Peterson sat in the police station, headphones pressed against her ears, tears streaming as she listened to Emma's small but steady voice. "She was always the brave one," Janet whispered. Even in fear, she tried to protect her friends. Across the table, the Brennans clutched one another's hands, their grief raw as Lucy's sobs filled the room. The Rodriguezes, quiet but resolute, wept softly as Mia's questions for her mother cut through decades of unresolved sorrow. The revelation spread through Millhaven like wildfire. Memorials appeared beneath the oak tree where the girls had once played. Flowers, ribbons, and handwritten notes left by neighbors who still remembered. A community that had carried guilt for decades found itself grieving anew, but also united in acknowledging the truth. For the parents, closure was complicated. They finally knew their daughters had been taken, not lost to chance or negligence, yet the knowledge could not bring them back. There was anger at Harold Vance, relief that he was identified, and sorrow that justice would never be served in a courtroom. Despite the pain, the families resolved to honor their daughter's memory. Plans were made for a joint memorial, a foundation created in their names to support other families of missing children. From tragedy, they hoped to forge something that might prevent others from enduring the same endless weight. The voices on the tapes would never fade from their minds, but neither would the determination to ensure Emma, Lucy, and Mia were never forgotten. The story of Emma, Lucy, and Mia is both unique and tragically familiar. 3 young girls vanished on a summer afternoon, their laughter replaced by silence, their absence reshaping an entire community. For 34 years, questions hung unanswered, tearing at the hearts of their families and haunting every street of Millhaven. The tapes, discovered by chance, finally revealed pieces of the truth, but they could never restore what had been lost. Their voices, frightened yet brave, linger like echoes from the past, reminding us of innocence stolen and the resilience of those left behind. Though Harold Vance escaped earthly justice, his shadow no longer hides. The discovery of the tapes illuminated his crimes, proving that even decades-old secrets can eventually be uncovered. For investigators, it underscored the importance of persistence. For the families, it confirmed what they had always known in their hearts. Their daughters were taken, not forgotten. Today, the oak tree still stands in the Petersons' backyard, its branches stretching wide over the small memorial garden beneath. Sunflowers for Emma, lavender for Lucy, roses for Mia. Each bloom a promise that their names will not fade into history. The legacy of this case lies not only in the sorrow it carries, but also in the changes it inspired: better protections, stronger investigations, and a reminder to never give up on the missing. Even when the trail runs cold, hope must remain alive, because sometimes answers come when no one expects them,